Beis 15b. And we learned yesterday the new Mishnah. The new Mishnah yesterday was a Mishnah that talked about a person using spits or bedboards for their sukkah to use for schach for their sukkah. And the problem was that you cannot use those items for schach because the spit, if it's made out of wood, it might have either it has a metal piece to it, which would make it a kli, a makabel tumah. It's a vessel that's susceptible to impurity, and because of that, it would be ineligible for schach. Or maybe, according to the Rambam, he says that we're talking about metal spit. So for the whole spit is metal, so then of course it's not eligible for schach, even though metal comes from the ground, but doesn't grow from the ground. It doesn't grow from the ground. It might come from the ground. It doesn't grow from the ground. That's ineligible. It's unacceptable for schach. And then a board of a bed, we said, was also seemingly a little problematic because a board of a bed is flat. Any flat wood item is not makabel tumah, nor under normal circumstances is not a receptacle for impurity. And yet the Mishnah makes it pretty clear that it should be invalid for schach. And the reason is because we mentioned that there's a few types of very severe impurity, like a zav or a zava, a nida, a yeledes. There are types of impurity that are, they have special rules to it, that the law is that if they anything that they sit on or lie on would be a recipient of tumah that takes on the same level of impurity as the person itself, becomes an av hatumah, which is something that's not common in the laws of tumah. Normally, when something is a recipient of impurity, it takes on a lesser degree of impurity, and it gets lesser and lesser. There's a rishon, the first degree, then the sheni is like the second degree, and it keeps on getting a lesser level of impurity. However, when it comes to these four types of impurity, with regard to them sitting on something or lying on something, so they take on a much more strict level of impurity, where this item, even though it could be it's a flat piece of wood, but it's susceptible to tumah because of its material used for, it's an item used for sleeping and lying upon, and therefore it is susceptible to impurity. Normally, a plain piece of wood would not be, but because it's a bed, it's a board of a bed, and therefore considered makabel tumah. So therefore, it's not eligible for schach. And the only thing is that our Mishnah mentions, well, there is an option that if you leave space in between each of these bed boards, or you leave space in between each of these spits, and you have an equal space, that would be kosher for schach. That's basically the first half of the Mishnah. And then the second half of the Mishnah said another law. Let me mute everyone. I hear some noises. So the second half of the Mishnah mentions this famous case of chotet begadish, person who digs out of these, there's a pile of bundles of hay, or like a haystack, and he digs out to make a sukkah. And so the Mishnah says, Eina sukkah. This is not a valid sukkah. And we explained that the problem with that is that you have to make the sukkah, not have a sukkah made without you making it. And here, what's happening is, this was a haystack, and you dug out for the purpose of sukkahs, you dug out what you wanted to be a sukkah. So you could say, well, I dug it out for the purpose of shade and, for the mitzvah. You could say I did all the right things, except for the fact that you didn't make the schach. The schach was made or automatically. So because you didn't do anything with the schach, that's what caused that this would be a non-kosher sukkah. If you wanted to make it kosher, what you would need to do would be, take off the schach and put it back down. Lift it up, wave it, whatever, put it back down, move it around. Then you would be making the sukkah kosher. And yesterday, Victor had asked about what happens if you build a sukkah and a branch falls off of a tree and falls right on the sukkah. Would that also fall into this category of tasev v'leimanase that you have to build? You have to build the sukkah, and it shouldn't be built with, shouldn't just happen to be built. And the law is correct. What Victor is saying, seemingly that would be a correct law. But really it has a different problem as well. And that is the sukkah is supposed to be made for shade. So the fact that this branch fell off and I fell onto your sukkah, this is not, in the first place, it's not even made for shade. Even if you made it for shade, you would also have a problem that it's not made into a sukkah. But it's
my question was, let's say enough branches, it was a very windy whatever, and enough branches fell just right that it looked just like as if you would have put them there yourself. That's how you would have put them to make it exactly the way you would have done it to make a kosher sukkah.
Right. The only
so now the question is you didn't do it though.
But besides you not doing it, which is true, besides that it's not done by, on purpose, but it wasn't even done for shade. It fell that way. So that, in other words, it would fall into the category of that it's not a sukkah. Like we said, even goyim could make a sukkah. B'diavad, it's not the lechatchila, but b'diavad, if the goyim make a sukkah, that would be kosher, as long as they made it for shade. As long as that was their purpose. It wasn't meant for storage. It wasn't, meant for other purposes. It was meant for shade. As long as it's meant for shade, it's kosher sukkah. Here, the branches just fell off, so it wasn't even, they weren't even placed there for shade. Now, the case in our Mishnah was we dug out a sukkah, and you dug it out for a sukkah. So you dug it out for shade. So you sort of could say, well, I made this for shade. The answer is, but the roof nothing was done to it. It's tasev v'leiman asui. It was, you have to make it into a sukkah for shade. You can't just have it the roof can't just become meant for shade. It has to be made into a purpose of, has to be done. You have to make it into a sukkah. Yes, David.
Yeah, according to this concept that the Baal Shem Tov said about the leaf that falls, so it didn't just happen. Hashem put it there. Hashem participated in your schach.
Okay, I mean, everything that happens in the world is for sure from Hashem. Nevertheless, we have to do things. It has to, it has to be made the way Hashem wants it, which is that a person placed it there for shade and so on. And we can't say that a person did that. You can say Hashem did it. We don't know if Hashem meant it for shade or he meant it for you to have to move around afterwards, But I will mention this. There seems to be broad, and I would like to look up the original source of this, but there does seem to be an opinion that does say that if you're watching the branch fall off the tree and you're interested in it for shade, that could work. In other words, because your intent is for shade and you're seeing it fall off the tree and it fall onto your sukkah. So there seems to be such a view. Again, to me, it sounds a little surprising that you could rely on that. but it does. I saw it quoted somewhere, and it seems like there is such a view. So, but I think the logical way of understanding it is that it's not acceptable for schach. That's the
It's not that the thing happened. Hashem allowed it to happen. Hashem made it happen.
right. But did Hashem put it there for schach purposes, or did He put it there so that you'll have to move it around or ask your Rav? Like, we don't know why Hashem put it there. You know what I mean? It could be Hashem put it there so that you're going to go to ask your Rav because He wants you to have a relationship with your rabbi, or
Rabbi?
he wants you to have to move it around, do something, and then correct it. Well, you know what I mean? It's hard for us to know the reason why Hashem does things. And then it could be that it has to be done by a human. So it could be even if you know that Hashem put it there for schach, but the law is that maybe it has to be it might have to be done by a human. So that could also.
He put the leaf that turned over for shade for the worm.
Right. It could be for shade, right? Again, we don't always know why Hashem's doing things, but it could be, yeah. But it could be that you need to do it. It needs to be done by man. It has to be kavana of a person. How about if you would know the intent of animals and animals did something? Would that be good enough? Actually, what was the case over there? The animals built the sukkah Srakbash. What was that case? That's interesting. I'm just thinking now. With the animals we had before with the oh. Then page 8b we had the Ganbach and the Rakbash, and those two sukkahs. What was the case? The sukkahs. Sukkahs behema. Could be, huh? Interesting. If an animal makes the sukkah, there is such a pshat that's what it means. Either you made it for the animal, or the animal made it. It could be that it's kosher. So maybe it works if Hashem has in mind for shade. So if an animal could make your sukkah if he has in mind for shade, and it was built in a way that it's for shade and it's considered kosher. I don't know if it's brought down from a Rashba to learn it that way. I wonder if in Shulchan Aruch, I have a Shulchan Aruch right here, if they accept that. It's behema. So because goyim noshim behema.
So, in other words, there's such a thing that animals have kavanah. They can have.
So yeah. So the thing is, you see from here that maybe you don't need kavana. I mean, again, it's like a goyim. It's not. But as long as it seems that's why it was that's the purpose of its being made. In other words, it's not so much that the kavana means something. It's like it's a sukkah built in a way that it's for shade. That you could tell that was their goal.
Rabbi.
But it is interesting because normally we don't we don't really think of animals having kavana. It actually brings up an interesting thing. Thank you, David, for bringing this up. It does. It makes us think a little bit about this, how that works. That it was a sukkah that was sort of the animals made, or at least according to one understanding. You could translate it differently. You could translate it that it was made for an animal for a purpose of shade, but well, anyway, the point is that if it did happen, it would seem that you would need to. It seemed pretty clear that you need to redo the schach, even though, as David tells us, Hashem sent you the shade. Nevertheless, it would seem that would be the halacha. Yes, Moshe.
What I wanted to ask is, a lot of in some countries, and they have these like I don't know what you call cabanas or whatever they call them. They're on the beaches, and the guys build them basically for shade, okay? Because people use them, they're lined up sometimes. You go on the beaches, they have them set up. Maybe in Tel Aviv they got them too. I don't know.
What's the roof made? What's the roof made out of?
Schach, it can be made out of like straw. It can be made out of bamboo sometimes. And I'm wondering, are those considered kosher
sukkah?
Kosher schach? Yeah.
Well, the question would be also, are the walls enough walls for it? Like, I'm guessing that they're probably more walls that are just a skeleton of
lattice. I've seen some of them made from lattice. Actually, I'm not joking.
They're three walls, or is it more like?
Yeah.
Oh,
3-4 walls. Yeah.
And that would be interesting. If we should get some picture, see if you can find anything online.
I'll see if I can find some. Yes, I will.
Yeah, maybe we could decide if you can use them for. We could make a little barbecue for our koil on the beach. Okay, let's continue. So the Gemara here had said that there's a law regarding Shabbos. And the law regarding Shabbos is when you have a wall, in order to make a domain, a private domain that you would be allowed to carry in, it needs to have like a fence around. And how does the fence have to be made? So the fence, the simplest way to make the fence would be if you have a vertical poles, and each pole is within 3 handbreadths of the other pole. So then what you would have is the law of Lavan. You would have a special halachic wall that makes it as if it's fully enclosed. Our Gemara brings a case where you did not do that. But what you did was you put these thick poles, very thick, like beams, where there's a thickness of like somewhere around 9 inches. It's 3 handbreadths. And you left an empty space in between each of these vertical beams. You left a space of also 3 handbreadths. So you have 3 handbreadth beams and 3 handbreadth space in between each. And what ends up happening is if you calculate all your beams and all your empty spaces, it'll be exactly equal. So regarding the laws of Shabbos, can you consider this a wall or not a wall? Meaning, it's a half wall. It's every other, there's the beam every other every little area. After every empty space, there's another beam, and it's exactly equal to the amount of empty space is the amount of beams. Now, the term in the Gemara is called parutz ke'oimed. Parutz means the breach, and oimed means literally means standing, but it means the solid. So the breach is exactly equal to the solid. So we have a machlekes, we have an argument in the Gemara. Rav Papa says that's okay for Shabbos, kosher. And Rav Huna Berei de Rav Yoshua holds that it's usher, that you would not be allowed to carry in that inside that area. So basically, the question is, how do we apply that law to our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah spoke about the laws of Sukkah, and we also talk about a case in our Mishnah where you have kosher schach and non-kosher schach, and it's exactly equal. So the Gemara seems to see a similarity there and say, well, the opinion that says that equal is not good with regard to the laws of Shabbos seemingly would probably want to hold the same thing with regard to the laws of Sukkah, that it's half and half. If it's 50-50, it could be a problem. Again, it's a machlokes. Rav Papa seems to say 50-50 is okay. But Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua says 50-50 is not okay. And that's what he says regarding the laws of Shabbos. So how is he going to learn our Mishnah? And does our Mishnah basically prove him wrong? And the Hebrew term for that, the Gemara's term for that, is called tiyufta. Tiyufta is that it proves him wrong. It like answers. Tiyufta means like it gives a final answer. Like it's like a reply or a rebuttal. It totally refutes his law. So it's a tiyufta. It'll prove him wrong. That's just the term the Gemara uses. It's a so does this prove wrong Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua? And the Gemara answers that it doesn't. And initially the Gemara says because our Mishnah when it says equal, it doesn't mean so literal equal. And then the Gemara says, well, why not? There's a concept of efshel l'tzamtzem, could mean exact. A person could be exact, and so maybe it does mean it literal. The Gemara says, well, the way we're going to translate the Mishnah, at least to answer up Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua, is that he doesn't understand it to mean that way. Even if a person could be exact, but that's not the understanding of the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't mean to say that. It means that you're giving a little extra space, or it means that you're putting the schach the opposite direction, and therefore you have more schach, and the more schach is going to basically be mevatel, or either like nullify the other, or the other stuff will be be submissive to the kosher schach, so to speak. It'll like become anyway. Bottom line is you'll have more kosher schach than non-kosher schach, and it'll be a kosher sukkah. Yes, Victor.
So, I've heard a Dvar Torah about the Makat Becharot, when Hashem says kahatzot. Hashem doesn't say hatzot, he says kahatzot. But one of the Dvar Torah was that kahatzot is because that the human beings are not exact, and because the earth rotates, every Bechor in the exact second when that section of Mitzrayim would actually rotate to be Hatzot with a billionth of a second difference, that Hashem can be exact, but the human beings we can't be exact, and they didn't want to have Paro have an excuse to say, oh, you see, he was off by Hashem. You said Hatzot, and he was off. So right. that really it's really Hashem who's the only one who has this exactness, and human beings are not in that realm.
Right. So. Right. Good point. And I would just answer to you're asking a challenging question over here, because the Gemara seems to say it's efshel l'tzamtzem. What it would seemingly mean is that because the Torah wasn't given to angels and it was given to humans, so Hashem leaves it up to humans to be able to know what's considered exact. In other words, we are allowed to rely on what we can calculate to be exact. Even
So
though you may say that we're not going to be as a billionth of a second, perfect, but the fact is that I'll give you an example where you see this. There is a prohibition of making the same shemen hamishcha or the ketairas that is made in the Beis Hamikdash, right? You can't make that same stuff. If you make it exactly the same measure with the same measurements, it's I think a penalty of lashes. How is it possible that you would make it exactly the same amount and so perfect, right? The answer is that as long as it's basically the same measurement, so you might be a tiny here, a little piece of like a little tiny speck of wheat different, and
so you say exact there is exact on a human level, there's exact on Hashem's level. They're not the same, right. But there's such a thing.
A concept of that we can say that the Gemara is saying we could say the person could be precise, and that would be acceptable according to halacha. And again, it's sort of based on the fact that the Torah wasn't given to angels; it was given to humans, and it's all basically the same thing as like eating a kazayas, or where it's impossible to know exactly is this exactly or not exactly, but it's what humans can calculate. So that's my understanding. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Yes, Mordechai.
And the thing about whether equal should be counted with less or with more kind of reminds me of that Hasidic tale about that in Russia the government wanted the Jews to become more modern, and so there was a conference where a minister called three Rabbanim, and one of them was, I think, the Chabad Rebbe at the time. And then there was another one who was in favor of modernization, and there was one that was neutral. And at first, the minister was inclined to include the one that was neutral with the one who wanted modernization, but in the end decided that the one that was neutral should count as maintaining tradition.
I'm not familiar with that story. David knows it. So interesting. So okay, getting back to our Gemara. So our Gemara, the next piece of Gemara does talk about the Aruchais Hamita, which is the bed post, the bed boards that are the Aruchais Hamita, the long boards of the bed, and a person used those for schach. So we're on page 15b. We're 4 lines from the top of the page. Oy ba'aruchais hamita. Or he used these long boards of the bed for schach. The Gemara now says, Lema Mesayeyale. Let's say that this is a proof, or its support, Le Reb Ami Bar Tavyum, to the opinion of Reb Ami Bar Tavyum. And what we're going to be dealing with is the fact that something is now not a vessel, but it was once a vessel that was a receptacle for impurity. And that's sort of the case of the beds, because the bed, it was once a bed, and now it's just a plain piece of wood. We're not dealing with an entire bed here. We're dealing with a piece of wood, aruches hamita, and this piece of wood is being placed on your sukkah, and you have a few of them, and you're placing them throughout your sukkah, and you're leaving empty space in between. And the Gemara is basically saying, the Mishnah basically told us that if you just use these for schach, it wouldn't be kosher. But if you fill it in with the empty space with kosher schach, then it would be acceptable. And the Gemara here is saying, but well, what exactly is the situation with this bed, that it was once a vessel, but now it's not? So does it regain its permissibility for schach, or does it once it's off, it's off? And there are similarities
once
here.
What is off?
Once the bed is not eligible for schach, and it loses its permissibility to be used for schach, even after the bed becomes disconnected, would it then be returned to its permissibility, or does it stay non-kosher schach? Can it come back to its being permissible for schach, or does it stay non-kosher even after the bed is broken apart?
Why was it not kosher when the bed was broken apart?
Well, because
or are you saying it's a bed?
It's no longer a vessel.
Right.
It's no longer susceptible to tumah, or it's no longer a vessel that should be. Do we say that it's still susceptible to tumah even after it's no longer a vessel?
Okay, right.
So the Gemara says, let's say that this is a support to Rabami Bar Tavyumi, because the Amar Rabami Bar Tavyumi, sichacha bevaloi kelim, if he was masachet, if he used for schach with baloi kelim, is the like patches of clothing, and these patches do not like worn out pieces of clothing that do not have 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. It's quite quite small little pieces of material. So they're like patches, but they're not even good. They're really small, and they're really not makabel tumah. They're not susceptible to tumah because they no longer are usable. Now, if they would be 3 by 3, 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, then they would be usable. But now they've reached a measurement that's even smaller than that. They no longer are susceptible to tumah. So the question is, well, then, could you use them for schach now? Now, let's think for a second. Would you be allowed to use it for schach? Clothing. Would clothing be eligible for, would be permissible for schach? So what is the clothing made out of? That's the question. If it's made out of flax or linen or cotton, then it should be eligible. You should be able to use cotton or flax for schach. Although now, I don't know, flax seeds are edible. I don't know which part is that. Just a little part of the flax is the seed. I guess the main part of the flax is what do they use for the linen? Is that the whole stalk, or just the seeds? I guess probably the whole stalk is probably we don't have any experts over here, and I'm for some reason it seems to me that the flax itself should be eligible for schach. Maybe the seeds won't be if they're edible. Maybe in the olden days they didn't eat the seeds. I don't know. Nowadays they figured out how to make oil from these. Every little thing you could make oil out of. I don't know in the olden days if they did that. I don't know if they ate flax seeds in the olden days. Maybe they didn't.
My wife bought these new hand towels, and I thought that they were cotton. And I looked at the ingredients, and it says it's made from 50% cotton, 50% bamboo.
Huh. Right. Okay. All right. So anyway, bottom line is that there are clothing that should be kosher for schach. However, if the clothing was made into clothing, it's not eligible for schach. Now, if the clothing is worn out and broken, ripped and torn, and now it's even less than the size of a three finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, that is where our Gemara is talking about. So it's, if you want to use that for schach, the Gemara says psula, it is invalid for schach. And Rashi tells us that even though it's not makabel tumah now, it's not susceptible to impurity, because it's no longer a vessel. Nevertheless, since it came from a vessel, the rabbis made a decree and said you can't use it for schach. So the Gemara wants to say that this is similar to the bed boards, that they came from a kli, they came from a vessel, and even though now it's not really fit for anything, at least at this stage, it's not a receptacle, it's not a utensil, but nevertheless, since it came from a vessel, maybe that would be a reason why it's not kosher for schach. Again, the Gemara is trying to figure out, why are the bed boards not kosher to be used for schach? Now, I should mention that we're not talking about bed boards that are 4 hand breadths wide, because if they were that wide, we would get ourselves into a big can of worms and from previous Gemaras. But we're talking about bed boards that are smaller than that. And because of that, we don't have to deal with previous Gemaras, and we can just deal with this specific case where you're using a bedboard for your schach, but it's less than 4 hand breadths and maybe less than 3 hand breadths, according to get rid of all, no issues at all, So it's a smaller board of a bed. In fact, I think in Shulchan Aruch, when it mentions it, it says clearly that we're dealing with boards that are less than the size of 4 hand breadths, if I'm not mistaken.
When you say, are you talking about the bed frame?
Yeah, like the frame, yeah. But it's like it's like a piece of wood that goes on there's 4 pieces of wood in a bed frame. At least in the olden days, nowadays you have all different types of bed frames. But in the olden days, so they have 2 long boards and 2 short boards. There's the 2 long boards that go along the length of the body. And then the 2 short boards, one goes along the head and one goes along the feet. And so you have the long boards. So these are called aruches, the long ones. So
I have a picture. Should I share the picture?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Also, Rabbi, if they're comparing the boards with skewers, which skewers are pretty narrow.
Right.
In other words, the same paragraph is talking about skewers and the boards. So
Right.
maybe the fact that they're both in there together is telling us that they're somewhat narrow.
Right. Right.
Oh, look at that.
So that's so again, here you have the aruches, the two ones that are the long ones,
one on top of the other.
Yeah, the long ones, and the small ones would be right. That would be that would be the would not be called the aruches hamita. They would be called the some other like kutsara, the small ones. Okay, which we'll soon see. Thank you, David, for giving us the.
So he's not even talking about any support for your body. 1 minute, you can't sleep on that. Well, you either have to put planks or
yeah, but it's part of the bed. The whole bed would be tameh.
Yes,
would be course. That whole bed would be tameh as part of your
right.
Part of the items
function.
That it functions as a bed. Okay, so let me just pull up over here in Shulchan Aruch. It talks about If you were in chapter 631, it says, if you are masachich with spits that are puzzle for schach and they don't have 4 hand breadths wide, and you don't put them next to each other to make it calculate them together into 4 hand breadths. So it speaks about that. And right, so it mentions about the spits. Interesting, it doesn't I don't see here the mention of the bed. Okay, well, anyway, it mentions clearly that the spits are not 4 hand breadths, and you didn't put them next to each other to make them 4 hand breadths, that they would add up to be 4 hand breadths if you put a few together. Okay, so now the Gemara that we're learning, we're on 15b. We're now 3 lines up, 4 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says that it's not really a proof. You can't really say that this is a support for Rav Ami Bar Tavyumi's statement about using worn out clothing for schach, and that is invalid. But this, the fact that you're using a bed, a post of a board of a bed, that a frame, I guess you should say, that would be a better word, maybe. The frame of the bed, this is not really a support for that. Why? So the Gemara says, "Keda Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rebbe," because like Rav Chanan said, the name of Rebbe, Be'arucha, if you have the long frame, the long piece of the frame, Ushtei Kra'ayim, with the 2 legs that are attached to it, Biktsara Ushtei Kra'ayim, or you have the Kitsara, the small piece of the frame, like the piece by the head or by the feet, and that piece together with Shtei Kra'ayim, the two legs, that these are what we are referring to. And because we're dealing with this piece, that's not just a piece of the frame, but it's more than that. It actually has some legs with it. Therefore, it is more of a reason to consider it a vessel. When it came to the garments that were worn out and ripped and broken and torn into small pieces, tiny pieces, there we are relying on a rabbinic decree that, well, because it came from a vessel before it was invalid for schach, where the rabbi said you can't use it even now that it has become unusable for other things and it shouldn't be susceptible to impurity. Nevertheless, we're going to keep on its rule of not being kosher for schach. It's now invalid for schach, just like it was before. Here, we're dealing with something else. And the Gemara is not saying that Rav Chanan explains our Mishnah this way. He explains another Mishnah this way, and the Gemara says, similar to what he says in the other Mishnah, that's what maybe the meaning of our Mishnah is as well. So the Gemara now is going to ask, well, where does he say this about? Which Mishnah is he talking about where he mentions this idea that the frame that we're talking about is not just a little piece of wood, but it actually has legs to it? So let me just get the flow of the Gemara here. So the Gemara then says, Hachinami, or we're 2 lines up from the bottom of the page. Hachinami, here also, just like he says it in that other Mishnah. So here also, it's possible to explain our Mishnah this way. And if you explain our Mishnah this way, then it will no longer be a support for the statement of Rav Ami Bar Tavyumi. It won't be a question on him. It just won't be a support to him, because we're not talking about such a scenario where something is totally not a utensil. Here, it's somewhat still a utensil. It still has some element of a vessel to it, of an item that's that usable. So he says it about another Mishnah, this Rav Chanan in the name of Rebbe. And now the Gemara says, but here also we could say the same thing. Hachinami, here in our Mishnah, we could say the same thing. Ba'arucha u'shtei kra'ayim. We're talking about the long piece of the frame that it has with it 2 legs. And the same thing would apply. B'ktsaru u'shtei kra'ayim. That the same thing could apply if it was the small piece and 2 legs, and they would be like usable, which would mean that there may be some type of they could be considered susceptible to impurity, and therefore they would be invalid for schach, not only rabbinically but possibly even biblically, because they are some type of utensil. They're usable. They have a usage, and you can't bring a proof to baloi kalim.
Rebbe, it's almost like it would be recognizable as what it once was. And therefore, if it was once no good because it was a keli, I don't know, it doesn't say it here, but the idea that if you have the board with 2 legs already, and I never knew where the phrase came from that argument has legs. But now, obviously, this is it. But but I think that would be, and from the illustration that David showed before, that would even make it more so. That when you see that piece laying on top of your sukkah, you said, hey, you slept on top of your sukkah?
So the thing is, what you're saying sounds good, except for the fact that the understanding seems to be that this is even biblically. In other words, your point would be beautiful if this was rabbinically, this was a rabbinic law. So you would say, this is much different than the case of the clothing, because this, you can see where it came from. You see exactly what it was. It was the vessel part of it is there. So there's more of a reason to make a decree here than there is to make a decree when it comes to these pieces of clothing, which looks like it might never have even been a piece of clothing. It might have just been pieces before they were even made into clothing. Never even started out as a clothing. It was the piece of material that got cut off because it was not part of the initial clothing. You know what I mean? Here, it's much more clear. The only thing is, it seems that the Gemara is saying that this is biblically a problem. And therefore, you don't have to come on to the fact that it's visible. It's not about being visible necessarily. But anyway,
defining the reason for the biblical prohibition.
Well, okay, let's see. So where does he say this? Where is the source? So the source is a Mishnah in Caleb. Heicha, the Gemara says, Heicha itma. Where is it stated, this saying of Rav Chanan in the name of Rebbe? So the Gemara says, Heicha itma de Reb Chanan amar Rebbe. Where is it stated, this statement? Aha, ditnan, on this, that it says in a Mishnah. Now we turn to page 16a. And 16a, that it says over there, a mita mitames. A bed is going to be mitames. Mitames means it's a recipient of impurity. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a recipient because people is used for lying upon. And when is it so? So the Gemara said, the Mishnah says over there, it's mitames, it becomes tameh. See, if it would be mitames, it would mean it makes something else tameh. But mitames means it becomes. It's susceptible to becoming tameh. And when is that? When it's chavila, when it's complete, like a bundled up, so to speak. Rashi says biyachad. It's attached together when it's attached. Now, what happens if it's broken into pieces? So it's mitames chavila and umitaheres chavila, and it becomes purified if it was impure, and you want to be toivel it, you want to dunk it in a mikvah. So you dunk it while it is complete, and if you only dunked individual pieces, they would not become pure if you did that. Now, these are the words Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. So how is it, when is it tameh? Only if it's complete. When is it tahar? If you dunk the entire thing in the mikvah, then it'll be tahar. It'll become back purified. The rabbis say, mitames evarim. It can become impure, even if it's broken into pieces. Umitaheres evarim. And it could be become purified, even if it's pieces. And you don't have to attach them together in order to make the bed tahar. You could even dunk each piece individually, and it would become kosher. Yes, Moshe.
What about a Balkari who's building a sukkah, based on this? I mean, it seems like there's a connection here between this and a Balkari who might.
No. Let's clarify what we're talking about here. We're just dealing with items that are potential to be tameh, that they can't be used for schach. Now, it has nothing to do with.
I understand. But I'm just curious.
We don't care if something's tameh. You can use wood that was in a cemetery for your sukkah if you want. You can walk it through a cemetery, could touch a dead body, and you could then use it for schach. There's no problem with using things that are impure for well, I guess that's not true, because if it touches
when it breaks,
it's not susceptible.
Right. It loses its summa status when it's not a keli.
You could have some, right? It's not a keli, so I guess right. Okay, I guess I have to take back what I said.
And also, you said before dunking, I don't think you have to dunk either. I think once you break it apart, because you don't dunk kalim, a clay pot. You don't dunk that, and that. What was the whatchamacallit?
So let me tell you.
Big argument over the oven. The oven of Achnai, right. So the question was, if it's broken up, then it becomes tar. And then if you glue it back together, it becomes tameh. Or does it? That was the question.
Yeah. But the thing here is that according to Rabbi Eliezer, so the bed itself will become tameh if it's complete.
Right.
If you break it, according to Rabbi Eliezer, what happens? If it's broken, so the pieces are not mekabel tumah, right? So you will say, so then why would I even, if I dunk them in a mikvah, what do I gain? They're not tummy in the first place. Right? But there is a gain. Because when you rebuild it after, does the tumah come back?
That's the question.
Does the tumah come back when you rebuild it? So if he would allow you to dunk each piece in individually, then it would work that when you rebuild the this mita, this bed, it would actually be tahar. However, the way he holds is no, you can't do that. But when you build it back together again, it will be tameh, and you would dunk it in a mikvah when it's complete, and it will then be tahar. And of course, there are the tefillah is very applicable to kalim. We know that when you buy a keli from a guy, you have to be toivel it. And the famous Mishnah that they say in the shul after davening, all the Babak shuls, is machat shehina suna al malas hama'ara. The machat, the needle that's nesuna al malas hama'ara, that it's placed on the steps of the cave that has that's a mikvah, that's a water that's filled with water. Kivan sha'avar aleha hagal. Once the wave goes over that needle, tahira, it is tahar. So it's all about being toivel, this needle that's impure. Anyway, so the bottom line is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the bed has to become you have to be toivel it when it's complete. And the Chachamim hold that the individual pieces, if they're broken, they're makabel tumah, and they're metaher. You want to be metaher them. You individual pieces, you could dunk them in the mikvah and be metaher them, and that's the opinion of the rabbis. So, so the Gemara says, my nihu. What are we talking about? So, Amar of Chanan, Amar Rebbe, what Chanan says. Knows what are the rabbis talking about? That broken pieces of makabel tumah, which is sort of what Isaac was touching upon. If it broke, how is it makabel tumah? It's broken pieces. So the thing is, my knee, what are we talking about? Amar Rab Chanan, Amar Rebbe. So here you have the statement of Rab Chanan in the name of Rebbe. We're talking about the arucha, the big part of the frame, and it's the ushtei kra'ayim, and it has the two legs with it. Or we're talking about katsaro ushtei kra'ayim, the small part of the bed of the frame that also has the two legs with it, and therefore it would be there's reason to say that that there's some level of vessel utensil that it has. If it was anything less than that, it would not be a vessel, and it would not be makabel tumah. It would not be as susceptible to impurity, and therefore you could explain our Mishnah ultimately the same way, that we're talking about something that is actually susceptible to impurity. Now the question is, so what really what does this really mean? To what is it really useful for? This piece of the board has two legs, shkayach, it has legs, and what are you going to use it for? Gemara says, "L'may chozyo." So what is it fit for? That we're going to call it a vessel, and it could be susceptible to tumah, at least according to the rabbis. Again, Rabbi Eliezer doesn't seem to agree with this, but at least the rabbis hold. So the Gemara says, "L'mis mechinu aguda," to lean it on a wall, and you could have two beams attached to the legs to the wall, and somehow it'll be usable. Ulamesa valayu mishta ashli would be basically fit to that you would be able to sit on, and ultimately it'll be makabel tumah. It'll be susceptible to tumah. Now, mishta ashli, the translation of that is that you would put some type of ropes, and you would weave it around. You would crisscross the ropes, and you would be able to lie on it. It would be matame. It would be able to be matame. So basically, it's because you could put it next to a wall, and it would be able to be usable, and therefore it's considered susceptible to impurity, at least according to the rabbis, and therefore it would end up that maybe you could translate our Mishnah to be the same way, that we're talking about something that it's not that it used to be susceptible to tumah, to impurity, it actually is. It's somehow usable for